Hello everybody, this is Gary Williams. Welcome to Cabaret Secrets. Today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, a great sound technician, TK from the UK. Welcome, TK.
How's it going?
Very good. Now, we worked together the other night. Tell me the kind of singers that you like to work with on ships, the kind of preparation that you like them to have had, or the kind of experience and so on.
It's always quite handy when you get your the rider comes through in advance, and you get they know how many mixes they want in the monitors. So if there's one person, it would be like one mix, two wedges, or sometimes you'll have four part singers. And they
like
would
a group with four singers coming on, like an act with four singers.
Yeah, and they, classical Motown kind of group, and sometimes they have four wedges along the front, and they'd want, four separate mixes or just one mix, and all that is quite handy to know in advance because we can prepare ourselves,
So, what else would you want to see in a rider, for example?
Just a stage layout, a stage plot, where you want to. I mean, every ship is typically the same. There's the 6 risers at the back. There's the, an opportunity of wedges, blah, blah, blah. You can have all that kind of stuff.
So this is just like, for people that haven't done this before, this is just, it's like a plan that you can just do on the computer.
Just here, you've got your 5 horns, you've got your, your two sax, 2 trumpets and a trombone. So there's a typical layout that we always do, but if you want anything out of the ordinary, it's useful to send it in advance, so that we can speed up the rehearsal time,
For people that haven't done a ship like this before, a Royal Caribbean ship, what is the typical layout going from stage right to left?
Going from stage right, you would have your keyboards, guitar and bass. Guitar and bass are usually on the back riser. So if you imagine a lattice of 6 blocks at the back of the stage, the centre 2, upstage and downstage, are the drum riser. And on stage right, at the back, on the back riser, you'd have your bass and guitar, and they'd be rows up. Bass bin further stage right, and then the downstage riser, you would have the keyboard. Now that's usually, it can be the grand piano and a keyboard, or just the keyboard or just a grand piano. So any combination.
Whatever the act wants.
Whatever the act wants, but obviously we keep the grand piano in the pit. So, if we know in advance that we want the grand piano, we can bring that up the night before.
And you normally put those on the floor. You don't have the risers up or the riser up?
No, not typically. But again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And then on the opposite side, you've got your drums in the middle, then stage left. On the back, depending on who the MD is, it determines which way around it is. But
because the musical director needs to have a good, clear sight lines with everybody in the band,
He needs to be furthest down stage. So if you've got a saxophone MD, you'd have your 2 saxes on the floor and your 3 horns on the back. On this ship, we have Jeff Ellis, who's our musical director, and he plays trumpet 1. So 3 trumpets on the front, and the saxes on the back.
And my setup is slightly different to that.
Which is why it was handy that we got the riser, the rider beforehand.
Yeah, and I'm mindful that when I change from the standard setup, when I'm changing things around, I'm very sensitive to the fact that the MD might not like it, or the band might not like what I'm doing, or what it's not just for the act, is it? Just think, this is going to look nice, because there are considerations like where the MD, and it just might not work the way that if I say, well, I want the trumpet to be here, he might get there and say, well, I can't direct, but then sometimes it might be the guitarist that's the musical director, or the pianist, and whoever it is, you've got to bear that in mind. You don't know who it's going to be necessarily until you get to the ship, so the act needs to be kind of flexible as well.
No, definitely. And on that note, with sending things ahead or changing things, you just got to think about the redundancy of data within the company, like multi-million-dollar company, and your rider could be in the system from 2 years ago, and you've changed it, but we kind of haven't got that information. So like you've said before, it's always useful to email ahead,
because sometimes I'm going to get on the ship and I'm going to be performing the very night that I've arrived, and the setup's already done on stage. I might not get on the ship till 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I've got a rehearsal at 5. The setup's already done, so it is important, isn't it, to get it in advance.
For sure. And depending on how the sound tech would work, some like to just do it on the fly, but some will just prepare it the night before or in the afternoon, and then you're ready. And as well, little things like, particularly on your rider, you wanted an SM58 capsule head instead of a U87, and knowing those things in advance kind of give us time to prepare and just get it ready, really.
What else? What we see on a rider?
Just avoiding kind of could I just haves. We can pretty much get whatever we need, but it's a big ship. Things might be here, there, and everywhere, so we can generally accommodate pretty much anything anyone asks for. But knowing in advance really does save the rehearsal time.
A lot of acts use click tracks. For those people listening that are not sure what a click track is, tell us.
A click track is basically a clicking track, essentially. This kind of, if you have tracks that you want the orchestra to play with, they need a tempo, like a beat. This is a typical click track. What we'll do is they have their own in-ear headsets on stage, and we would send that to them.
The click. So there's two channels. There's a left and a right channel, like a stereo thing.
You usually put the audio on the left and the click on the right. Make sure they're not like, they've got to be actually separate. Sometimes when you bounce down in programs like Logic and Thingy, they'll kind of bleed the two together a tiny bit just to create a pseudo stereo image. Yeah. And that's bad because you then would hear click in the house. So you just need to ensure that, because it generally comes on a CD or a mini disc. Yeah. And I would route one channel to their, what we call their avium headsets.
And that's the channel which has got the click in, and it's literally in their ear. They'll hear a count. They'll hear 1, 2, 3, 4, click, 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 click. And then
meanwhile,
the other channel.
Meanwhile, in the house on the other channel, we've got the audio.
And that's so what the audience can hear from that track is, well, whatever the act wants to have on the track, and often that's all the instruments that they want to be heard, which aren't actually playing
typically
live.
Congos, bongos,
maybe strings or something like that.
Strings, yeah. That kind of thing.
Yeah. So a good way of putting the rider in is avoid those, oh, can I just questions, so everything's prepared on the day. Tell me about microphone technique, and is this something that's a problem for you that you have to deal with? Do you find that most acts know what they're doing when it comes to using a microphone?
Generally, it's all pretty good. I would say our main focus is to keep the volume at a reasonable level. I typically measure the show as it goes, so I usually keep it at a reasonable 90, 91 decibel, kind of give 2 or 3 decibel either way.
Because generally the guests don't like it too loud.
No, don't like it too loud, or it's more like that kind of 1K kind of, that kind of sting in your ears that you're like, that's hurting my ears kind of sound, which is generally around the female vocals kind of area, which is why we have to pay particular attention to that particular area. So if you had a female artist who was kept a microphone close when she really belted those notes out, you'd then kind of put the sound technician in a position where he would have to add a lot more compression to your voice, which you don't typically want, because it's kind of compressing your voice, and it can be overused compression, and you can really notice it when it's not done right. It's a very kind of fine line compression.
I do know the way I want the band to sound, the way I want my voice to sound, but it's often a challenge for me to articulate that to the sound engineer. Are there things which I and other singers should know about that helps the communication?
A lot of people would say, it's sounding muddy, is meaning it's kind of almost muffly, all these kind of muffly kind of words are what.
A bit thick, a bit heavy, a bit bright.
Bright. Yeah. Those kind of words that really describe what you're feeling. It's almost like you describe how you're feeling about it. That muddy is the kind of typical one. A lot of times, which isn't received very well, is singers who just start barking out numbers. Is often.
What do you mean numbers?
I've just seen some sound engineers work by, they'll have singers shouting, there's too much 2K, or there's too much 3.65K.
They're talking about frequencies, sound frequencies. So this is where the singer's got a little bit of knowledge, and it's a dangerous thing, and they should probably just stick to muddy.
Just because it's kind of telling someone how to do their job almost. But, and it can be executed well, and it can be executed badly. You've not established any kind of friendship or business meeting.
I think this is the important thing, isn't it? It's important not to overlook this, that it's important to, I think, just if it's 5 minutes before the rehearsal starts, just sit down, introduce yourself to the lighting guy and the sound guy.
Yeah, just have a chat with them.
Yeah, just say this is the kind of thing, this is the way I kind of
You're
like
almost
it.
kind of reinforcing that we are on the same team and we are trying to achieve the one goal.
Yeah, rather than I'm a star and you're working for me and you've got to do what I tell you to do.
Yeah.
We were talking during my sound check, you used the word, I was trying to tell you what describe at the beginning how it was sounding, and you said the word like empty.
Yeah, empty is very kind of empty and full. You know, that kind of. Yeah, it's just like
It's kind of distant. The voice kind of sounded sort of in a different
lost.
place.
Yeah, and often if you don't fill the spectrum, I'm going quite technical here, but often if you don't fill the spectrum enough, like, you know, the spectrum being from the low rumbles to the high end. If there's bits missing, that's when it can sound. That's what we refer to as empty. So and basically, from a sound engineer's perspective, you're carving this spectrum out. So we carve a bit of space for the vocals, and we'll sit the bass exactly where we want it. And sometimes the trumpets can clash with everyone has a different characteristic to their voice, so you can often find things clashing, and you've just got to carve them out of the way just to make the singer sit perfectly in the mix.
You said you get the first idea of what you're going to do with someone's voice just from talking to them, just the normal speaking voice.
It's almost like a ballpark figure. You kind of hear them chatting, and you're like, okay, I understand what your voice sounds like without the microphone, and I need to re-emulate what your voice sounds like through a microphone, or as close to, and that's a good starting point. And then the way you sing is often slightly different, but you've got your first kind of idea of what this person.
How long does it take you to kind of get there, to get kind of sorted out? Because I see singers sometimes, as soon as they'll sing a few bars or they'll sing half a song and they start saying, oh, it's this and it's that. And so I used to do that, and I found it's better to wait a while. I'll have a little chat with the guy first and say, this is kind of what I want to get. And then I'll maybe give the sound engineer 15, 20 minutes or something to work on it before I start saying, and now I'd like it more like this or less like that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. Because bearing in mind, we're doing headliners every week, so we have our band presets kind of done. If you were doing a full band from scratch, it'd take you a lot longer, but once we've pretty much got the band how we like it, and our main focus is straight away on your voice, so we're kind of on your voice straight away.
Tell us about people that might want your job, because this is really for people that want my job, but people that want to come on ships and do the kind of job that you're doing, be a sound tech on ships. What kind of stuff should they know to be prepared? Is it a hard job to get? Is it difficult? What kind of experience do you need, and so on?
Typically, you need. I did a university degree in music technology, so that's kind of where my background comes from. And then I did maybe a year's experience in the industry. Like I did a lot of production shows. I did Billy Elliot and
on land,
yeah. A few amateur productions, this kind of thing. And you meet people, you network, you find your foothold. And then I applied for the cruise ship line. You can they're all, to be perfectly honest, most cruise ships are the same. Most different companies. So I applied to Royal, and I went down to London, did my interview, and they hired me as a technical stage staff. First off, that typically does happen. It's very rare for you to come straight in as a sound technician, just from the perspective of you're not just a sound technician on the cruise ship. You have an emergency duty. The way of life is very different to land. It's something to adjust to, and so being thrown onto, say, the Liberty with Saturday Night Fever. It's quite overwhelming.
This is a big ship we're on now. This is the Liberty. So how many guests does this ship hold?
We're 4,500.
So it's a lot of people, big shows, a lot of responsibilities. So they're not just going to throw you that straight away. You're going to work your way up a little bit.
Exactly. So I was technical stage staff for my first contract. Typically you have to work in the company for a year, but I did. I was technical stage staff, head stage staff, and then I was sound technician. I was promoted to sound technician. But there's the two positions that involve sound, a sound technician and lounge technician. Now, a lounge technician typically needs less big console experience. so the smaller desks.
This is like a secondary lounge, a smaller room
exactly.
where there are what kind of dance bands, maybe small acts, comedians, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And so that's kind of their typical position, and that's a lot easier to come by if you've not got as much experience on the big consoles. And you would talk about that in your interview, and they would understand that. The sound technician position requires you do have big console experience, mainly with Digico and mainly with the Yamaha. They're the two big boards that we use.
Is it a hard job to get? A lot of competition for it?
It's very, there is a lot of there's a lot of smaller ships out there, so to get onto the big ships you kind of got to be internally known and with head office, so head office know your skill set, they know who they're sending to the big ships, because at the end of the day, I mean, if you don't run the show, it does have a massive impact on the guest overall experience.
Yeah. And you mentioned the way of life on ships is quite different to that on land as well. It can be a bit of a culture shock for some people because it's quite a controlled environment, isn't it?
It is quite a controlled environment, and you don't ever kind of leave.
Like the Hotel California.
Yeah, it's very much like that. You don't clock off. You don't leave. Your phone's always on. People can always call you, and do always call you. So there's a problem at 1:30 at night in one of the lounges, and they need extra help, and they'll call you, and you're expected to go.
7 days a week?
7 days a week, 365 days a year.
And how long's a contract typically? How long would most people expect to be away from home?
6 months, 3 weeks is your typical contract, and then you would have 6 weeks off, 6 weeks back on land, and you're given that particular contract, but as you leave that contract, you're given your next. So they come in a kind of 6 month stints, but you would always leave with another contract, if that makes sense.
Right, yeah. I was talking to a lighting guy who said he was doing really big stuff on land, and he specifically wanted to go onto ships just to see what it was like, broaden his CV. But he was amazed at how well spec'd technically the ships are, and he was saying that he'd lit arenas with less equipment than was available to him in the theatres that he was working on the ships.
What I will say about the cruise ship business, if you do it for kind of 1 or 2 years, it's a very good springboard in the industry. So you kind of really do springboard up the ladder because you're exposed to so much high-end equipment. I mean, we work with Mayer speakers in our venues. We've got, obviously we have a Digico desk and the Digico D1 Live in the theatre. And we have everything's controlled by BSS. We have an LCS show control system also in the theatre to run Saturday Night Fever. So these are all Broadway West End spec products. I mean, you go to most Broadway shows and they're using exactly the same equipment. So to have that experience and just for a CV purpose or a resume, as the Americans refer to it, it's very, very productive in your
Do you
career.
find it carries the same weight? If you come off a ship, I mean, is there respect in the industry on land for what's going on cruise ships?
Over the last 15 years, there's been big growing respect for. I mean, it used to be seen that the lesser people, the unestablished entertainers would.
So if you couldn't make it on land, you'd end up on a ship. It's same for singers, actually.
Yeah, exactly, and it's very much turned around now.
Yeah.
Like you say, the production value and the equipment that even the singers are exposed to is pretty phenomenal.
I don't think I have ever worked in any theatre on land with the kind of technical stuff available to me for my little show. You can, because there's how many are in the production team for an act like me? How many people are around to help make sure it all works as it should?
Well, you typically have your sound and lights technicians, obviously. You have your production manager, and then you typically just have one stage staff. It'll be your stage hand, for anything you need on stage.
And for the setup?
For the setup, we'll use the 4 theatre stage staff the night before to set everything up.
So there's maybe 8, 9, 10 people there to help make sure that I'll have input and make sure that it looks as good and sounds as good as it can.
Yeah, I mean, for those singers or acts who know what they're looking for, we're talking about a lighting rig with over 80 fixtures in it. There's 80 moving lights and another 50 permanent fixtures. So the shows can be very well lit. We use all Martin equipment. That's pretty much a standard amongst the ships.
And if people do want to start working on ships as a sound or lighting technician, where do they go? Are there agencies? Do people go to the lines directly?
Typically, they have recruiting agencies that are specific for Royal Caribbean or NCL or Carnival, and you can really just Google it and find it.
Right.
It's very easy to find.
And they're looking for people, so that, you know, they welcome the CVs. It's easy to get in contact with them.
Yeah, it's not like this. You email and you never hear anything back. You will always have an interview. It's very easy to get your foot in the door as technical stage staff or stage staff. And then you can quickly work your way up. If you're focused and you know what you want, they really need people. So it's a very good opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this Cabaret Secrets podcast. If you've got any comments or questions, please visit cabaretsecrets.com, where you'll also find details of the Cabaret Secrets book, an indispensable guide on how to create your own show, travel the world, and get paid to do what you love.